There's something about clamshell devices that are just sublime. A certain majesty they have that the normal candy bar form factor just can't touch. Maybe that's something to do with their compact nature and supreme pocketability, or more than likely, it's nostalgia. That ever-present fever drug driving this niche. At any rate, with how much the wider retro handheld community clamors for clamshell devices, we really don't get them that often. In the last few years, I can only think of a couple prominent ones. There was, of course, the more recent Anbernic, too many letters SP, the Retroid Pocket Flip, and then Powkiddy made 2 clamshells. Their V90, which is their most recent device, and they also made the X18S, which while not being received the best, was one of the more prominent devices to sort of break into that niche. I mean, there had always been generic, rebadged, and cloned Game Boy SP devices, but 2021 was still more of the Wild West for emerging players. It was hard to tell who was here to stay and who was more of a fly-by-night AliExpress company. I say all of that to say, these companies don't really take that many chances on the form factor, despite it being so desired and wanted. And I've always been curious as to why. I mean, everyone wants it, that means it must be the superior form factor, right? Right? Well, there's only one way to determine that. I have my own Miyoo Flip right here. I bought this unit on the pre-launch day for the purpose of this review, and it feels very surreal holding it. For those keeping count at home, this device is one that the community has known about for ages. Months upon months of leaks, pseudo news, and just general coming soon nonsense really left a sour taste in some people's mouth. Mine too. Companies, are you listening? Let me get a little close. Please stop announcing devices before they're ready. Don't tell me you're working on some super special handheld and then it's not ready for another year. But I digress. Besides the surreal nature of finally holding the thing, how does it feel physically in my hands? Well, light, for lack of a better word, but in a good way. The weight itself is balanced. The battery is positioned internally in a way that makes it feel like the heft of the unit is firmly within your grasp. You want that feeling, trust me. For those who have held poorly made devices before, you know that weird, uncanny feeling you get when you pick one up. Your brain knows the device should weigh more than it does, but you can't get over that cognitive dissonance. I don't get that feeling with the Miyoo. It's very space and weight efficient. Coming in at 168 grams, it almost doesn't feel like it due to how little dead plastic there is in the chassis. At this point in the recording, I haven't taken the device apart yet, but I'd still wager there's little to no unused space inside this chassis, which, if true, is a good mark of engineering. Making use of every available millimeter of real estate does well to show the designers taking into consideration the device's profile and how it's meant to be handled. Which is an excellent segue into how the device itself feels to play and interface with. I'm not gonna lie to you, at first I had a hard time adjusting to the unit. It felt cramped and unergonomic. I would continually shift my hands to play as if I was struggling to get my bearings. I thought maybe it was just that I had grown and was no longer comfortable with small devices. Yet the Miyoo A30 felt fine to use. Then I figured maybe it was the device itself not being very comfortable, and I ran with that for a while. Yet I had this nagging feeling in the back of my mind like, this really can't be the issue. There was something I was missing and it was staring me right in the face. It was my GBA muscle memory. The Flip's profile is nearly identical to the original Game Boy Advance SP's profile. I had hundreds, maybe even thousands of hours with my OG SP. I'd play that thing until I could no more, so I was very familiar with its form factor. In fact, I still have a lot of ingrained muscle memory from those times, and I think that's what was throwing me off. I knew I needed an OG SP for comparison. So I reached out to a friend, and thankfully he still had his, which has also been ran into the ground. Though that's okay. This will serve our purposes quite nicely. For a second, I just want you all to look at them from above like this. I've got to give props to the team because the Flip is nearly a dead ringer for Nintendo's handheld. Their dimensions are almost an exact match. Starting with the Miyoo, its length is 80.6 millimeters, its width is 84.1 millimeters, and its height, with the lid closed, is 24.8 millimeters. Excellent figures, but how do they compare to the original? Well, the SP's length is 82.1 millimeters, its width is 83 millimeters, and its height is 25 millimeters. The slight differences in the dimensions really help to accentuate the improvements to the form factor. Those being the slight weight reduction and thicker base make the Miyoo a bit better to grip. In fact, a lot of the device's characteristics seem to be geared towards making it much easier to grip. You've of course got the matte plastic, which aims to diffuse and absorb finger oils and smudges. The plastic on the SP is much smoother and you can feel your digits gliding across its surfaces when you try. The buttons too have that sort of smooth and slippery texture to them, but truth be told, I'm unsure of whether that's because of the original plastic was like that, or this model is so worn down that this is the new norm for it. At any rate, slippery buttons do not feel great to me. It's not a stellar time, I'd say. However, the Flip's plastic, that's something I can get behind. As I said, it feels good in the hands and on my fingers, though that's not addressing the two giant elephants in the room. The expanded input selection is pretty, well, contentious choice in the community, it seems. These two sticks are either loved or hated by people, and, well, I get it. They change how you hold the device, and depending on your muscle memory, it can get uncomfortable. For example, when I'm playing on the original GBA, my thumbs are rested on the empty plastic of the front shell, and this unused space felt great for my overall hand posture. On the Flip, the sticks are obviously covering that area, and with the same posture, you can feel them. Now, is that a deal breaker? No, I don't think so. Depending on the angle, you'll either mostly avoid them or only have a part of your thumb touch them. Though what trips me up is just the subconscious decision by my brain to automatically wing my hands out like this. Now, you'd think there's not really a difference in how I'm holding both of these devices, but there is. When I hold the GBA, yeah, I have a sort of 15 or 20 degree tilt in my posture. The corners of my thumbs near my palms are actually flush with the corners of the device. But look at me holding the Miyoo. That same part of my hand is now above the corners of the device, and it forces my hands to adopt a sort of wing posture. Now, actually, it's less of an issue when reaching for the sticks, believe it or not. Since they're so low, you naturally shift out of that wing posture and adopt a closer hold. One Stick plus Button Games has my right hand gripping the console closer for button access, and my left one hanging lower for the left control stick. This is comfortable for me. My dominant hand has the major grip of the device, and my thumbstick hand can coast and drift along with its inputs. I think this is the way to comfortably hold this unit, but I can see others thinking I'm crazy. Wouldn't be the first time. Now, this may all seem like far-fetched pseudo-ergonomic study, but if you watch yourself and others interface with handhelds, you'll see this sort of micro-adjustment behavior. We don't acknowledge it often because in the heat of playing a game, you may not notice. But a little discomfort over a long stretch of time can add up. So, long story short, is the Miyoo Flip ergonomic to hold? Yes, it is. Mainly because of it being in the GBA's profile. It's a timeless design with strong intuitive cues for people who experience it. It just makes sense, and it's something that'd be difficult for a half-competent hardware company to screw up. And speaking of half-competence, it is now time to talk about the meat and potatoes of the device, the operating system. Oh boy, where to begin here? I want to first start by acknowledging the software team's efforts here. Yeah, they pulled a lot of free utilities and other stuff from open source projects, but making a functional OS is no easy feat. I do development work in Unreal Engine, so I know virtually nothing about how to program in Linux, but I can tell you this, it was difficult for me to even write one basic script for the Miyoo, so hats off for them for making it this far. However, we have some issues, and I want to vent a little. There's something about this niche in hardware tech that makes people so submissive. Retro handheld gaming is a virtually tiny sector in the overall market of gaming hardware. It may seem large to us because we're so plugged in, but it's really not big. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is that for as tiny and well-connected as this space is, as consumers, we should be more discerning and willing to accept less. I've noticed a lot of people will knowingly and willingly buy into a platform like the Flip, well aware of its issues, and not only deal with it, but vehemently defend it. How often have you guys seen someone say this regarding a retro handheld? Yeah, when you buy it, make sure you buy a separate SD card to replace the stock one. It's not very good. Or, yeah, the stock OS sucks, so that's why I'm getting mine and then installing custom firmware. And while these seem innocuous on the surface, if you really think about it, this is awful. When we as consumers buy into a product, it should work at time of purchase. And if it doesn't, there should be a plan of action by the company to rectify things. We, as consumers, have the power to change the tides. What we lack is the discipline. The Miyoo Flip was not ready to launch. Its state is less than ideal. Yet the device immediately sold out at launch and both subsequent resupply drops. And look, call me a hypocrite for buying at launch too, but no one's sending me review samples. I'm a working class YouTuber. There was so much discourse before the launch at how bad the stock OS experience would be. This is something that people know and expect. They're fully aware that the product will arrive with not a great stock experience, and they're comfortable purchasing something with the promise of the community fixing it later. Why? How? I mean, that's great, and I love the custom firmware community. I really do. They're amazing developers doing the Lord's work, but it's not their job to put these devices into a more polished and usable state. It's Miyoo's job. And, well, how do they do? Not amazing, I will say that. But the stock experience is leagues better than the A30. That I can confirm, even on the stock SD card. So, without further delay, let's jump right into it. As soon as you boot into the OS, you're going to be greeted by the cozy Flip theme, soft and round UI elements with large icons for everything, along with a nice little tune to boot. The presentation is on point for me, and so are the included utilities and apps. In your utilities tray, you get things like the emulator organizer, a standalone RetroArch, app folder, and of course, settings. The most interesting to me is the app folder. It's full of the included utilities and also games. Yeah, there's a few actual retail games I recognize here. Things like Celeste, Shredder's Revenge, and Sonic Mania. Now, I'll be honest and say I was not expecting this. I'm well aware of Portmaster, but this seems illegal? Like, is there some special clause or something I'm not getting? I'm no stranger to ROMs getting packaged with these things, but this feels like a step in a new, very gray area. Legality aside, the OS itself has larger issues. The instability is insane. I've moved to a SanDisk 512GB SD card because apparently that's something you have to do if you want a halfway decent experience outside of the box. Though the bigger issue besides legally gray games was starting them. For some reason, some ROMs just will not start. No matter if it's in RetroArch or Emulation Station, this unit just won't play some ROMs. Mario Tennis 64 is a very compatible game for N64 emulators. I've never had an issue with it on any other device, at least not launching. In fact, it launched on my Miyoo A30. No matter what I did, this game would just not launch. It was so aggravating. I also had this issue with Perfect Dark as well as with Paper Mario, not getting past the intro cutscene. The ROMs not starting could be a myriad of other issues, but when the same files work on other devices, but not this one, yeah, that's an issue with the Miyoo. Whether hardware or software, it's still a problem. Then there was the issue of intermittent crashes and freezes. Absolute garbage. I had this occasional issue where Sonic Mania would lock up the controls randomly. It happened mostly on the stock card, but I encountered the bug at least one time with the SanDisk card. There's also an audio bug too where the volume will just be randomly stuck at the highest level when exiting from a game. How did this device get delayed for so long and still ship like this? This is true madness. Miyoo had all the time in the world to make sure the Flip got out the door in a right and proper state. The OS should not have shipped like this. It's wholly unacceptable. And I have more grievances, but I need to take a step back for a second. There's a lot I want to go over in that section, but I don't want to overload you guys at once. So we're going to pivot towards gaming performance, which is definitely a mixed bag. There's a lot to go over, so I'm going to do my best to stay organized. Right off the bat, the performance profile of this machine is mostly acceptable with a few oddities. Just about everything below the N64 is rock solid. NES, Super Nintendo, Atari Lynx, the 7800, all the Game Boys, you know the drill by now. The Rockchip RK3566 is a 4-core ARM Cortex A55 CPU with a Mali G52 MP2 GPU. Wow, that's a mouthful. It's the same entry-level config we've seen since the all-winter A33 days. 4 ARM CPU cores and 2 Mali GPU cores. It's nothing fancy, but it is a solid offering for cost-effective handhelds. This chip eats 2D 16-bit stuff for breakfast. That's just not an issue here. You're not going to experience slowdowns playing Yoshi's Island on Super Nintendo or Super Mario Advance 3 on GBA. It's the performance for N64 and higher that, in my opinion, is offensively bad. It's a serious trouble spot that genuinely makes me question what the internal discussions were before launch. This is extending far beyond just some poor performing games. I brought up Paper Mario, Perfect Dark, and Mario Tennis as the worst offenders, but even games that do start and play have horrible issues. You have something like Ocarina of Time, leaving a horrible impression with its rampant graphical glitches and hitchy sound. Think that's a one-off? Look at how this device handles Star Fox 64, my favorite N64 game, and it's being mangled to death. You've got so much graphical bugs, it's untenable. The main menu is missing the highlight bar, and the theme skips here as well. The audio and the dialogue can also run in slow motion. Then you have serious graphical issues as well, Corneria is dull and lifeless, missing a lot of the clouds, color, and N64 specific graphics features that make this level just pop. Gaming depression, everyone. This is what it looks like. So, for my sanity and yours, let's move on to another platform. This console surprised me. It's one I know about, but never really go out of my way to emulate, so I wasn't sure what to expect. But the games I played that came installed ran pretty well. Panzer Dragoon 2 only had a few hiccups before settling at its max frame rate of 50 FPS. Then you had a Virtua Fighter that also put up an admirable performance level, around 44 FPS, which felt surprisingly decent. I'm not sure if that was like the highest frame rate on the original hardware, but from my cursory glance at the Sega Saturn, I'd assume so. I didn't add my own Saturn ROMs, but all the ones that came included worked just fine. Honestly, I don't really have a lot of complaints here. I'm sure you're gonna find some trouble spots, but Saturn gets a solid C+. For Sega's swan song console, I started with Sonic Adventure 2. I had a feeling that this game would really stress the hardware out. From the first cutscene, you could clearly see a few visual bugs, but nothing earth-shattering or devastating. Running through City Escape was a serious workout for the system. Dreamcast games really pushed the hardware. This is a console where we start using a majority of the available memory and clocking our GPU really high. But don't you worry, I've got receipts for later to back that up. Next for Dreamcast was Shenmue 1. Again, some graphical glitches, especially on the character's hair, but the presentation and performance here was really solid, tight frame rates and everything. Unfortunately, Mach&X had this awful audio crackling in the cutscenes. This is so disappointing because this game has an amazing soundtrack and it doesn't deserve to be butchered like this due to poor emulation. Performance itself was good though, very solid 60 FPS and super fluid movement. If you haven't played this game, you need to right now. I also played another personal favorite of mine, KO the Kangaroo. It's not a very hard game to run, but having it playable in this form factor almost makes some of the other pain and suffering worth it. This was rough. I started with God of War Chains of Olympus, and it was sheer suffering. The game was hovering in the mid-teens and low 20s for my entire playthrough. It's not playable, so forget it. There's nothing else to discuss here. Which is not quite the case with Vice City Stories. Cutscenes have audio troubles and massive frame time spikes, but general gameplay is smooth. I like this a lot. Unfortunately, the PSP emulator is not bulletproof. I'm not sure if the emulator is buggy or the configuration on the Flip is, but trying to navigate the settings menu is difficult. And not because the language is in Chinese, but also because it sometimes can just lock up and freeze on you, not letting you exit or change any settings. That's kind of great. Just excellent job, Miyoo. I'm sure this is what they mean when they say a captive audience. PlayStation is solid all the way through. I didn't have any issues with any games here. It was one of the systems on the device that just felt smooth from start to finish with testing. I felt more like I was playing games instead of looking for shortcomings or documenting bugs. The goal for me is always to get sucked into the device and find myself having fun when playing with it. If I'm having to focus on work, well then, something is probably going wrong. The ports were fun and they all seemed to run pretty well. I could tell there was definitely some frame drops in games like Half-Life and Shredder's Revenge, but that can certainly be forgiven due to the nature of what's going on here. This is probably where I had the most fun, to be honest. It's truly a novel experience to be playing games like Half-Life on a Retrohandheld device like this. The Portmaster team and all its contributors deserve a gigantic round of applause and tons of Patreon donations. I'm actually in the process of looking for more ports and maybe even porting one of my own old games to the Flip. This just feels fresh, like a new way to breathe life into devices that support it. Let's make sure as a community we really rally behind efforts like these. This is so much more healthy as a long-term solution for developers and hardware companies alike. Who knows what can happen in the court of law one day regarding emulators and whatnot. But There's definitely less of a potential for recourse when porting over games and using the assets from which you legally purchased. Needless to say, I love this. What I don't love are the problems we have with the hardware itself. And Houston, do we have a problem? And that problem, my friend, is power efficiency. Now, the Miyoo A30 had poor battery life in my opinion, and I never fully understood why. At the time, I figured the reason that battery life was so bad was because the unit had a static power draw, a fixed amount it took from the wall or battery, regardless of the actual workload. That's not the issue here with the Flip, yet this console is so inefficient at idle, it's shocking. The RK3566 in this device is capable of sipping power when in an SBC arrangement like we have here. The hardware team, plain and simple, did not do their due diligence with tuning this chip, and I'll prove it to you with data. Since I ordered my Flip last December, I've had my nose buried in so much Linux documentation, notes, forum posts, and whatever may have you, all in the efforts of taking a crash course in how to make scripts. There are really no good profiling tools for end users like us to collect serious data from these devices, and that's a problem for someone like me making big claims about what these pieces of hardware are doing. I made the mistake earlier of making a post online about the potential downfalls of some retro hardware, but I had no hard data to back up my points. I know, rookie mistake. So I set out to create my own program that would collect and monitor data from the device. Something low level and out of the way with more than enough data points for us to, come to concrete conclusions. So I'm formally introducing
Silicon F.O.X.X, F.O.X.X metrics, framework for optimized execution and exploration, monitoring, evaluation, tracking, reporting, and insight into computational systems.
So this script is basically the janky MSI afterburner we never got for this niche. It'll tell us pretty much everything we need to know about the system. It tracks CPU usage, GPU usage, RAM usage, and even battery health stuff. This utility took me, I want to say, a few weeks to create, and I first got it working on that one popular clone console, the R6-3S. Then I ported it over to the Miyoo. That wasn't very fun. The Miyoo is very limited in its development features, but nevertheless, I toiled ceaselessly to provide this for you, the community. It's very simple to activate, and it takes hardly any technical skill to install. Pretty much just connect your console to a computer, drag the file to a specific folder. That's it. Once there, you can execute the file itself and sit back and watch as the script does all the work. F.O.X.X Metrics is hosted on my personal GitHub, so if you're interested in having this utility, feel free to get it from there. But I digress. The whole reason for this venture was to get a better idea of what these handhelds are doing when we're playing them. FPS numbers from some emulators is just not enough data. So what is the Flip doing? Well, like I said earlier, it's using way too much power in general. Look at this scene here. We're just sitting at the main menu, not pressing any buttons, and on the default screen brightness of 50%. How many watts do you think this scene would use? Go on, take your best guess down below. I'll wait. Okay, have an answer yet? Well, if you said an average of 3 watts, then you'd be correct. That is an insane amount of battery drain on idle for this chipset. To put that into perspective, the open source R36S handheld with the same chip only uses an average of 1.5 watts on idle. Same core type, same GPU, only a different operating system. And actually, the console will start playing little videos of gameplay when you've been idle for too long. Those videos need the GPU to activate to even play them, and the console still uses less power than the Flip, which is a great interface with some lower res icons and some light music playing. Unbelievable. There's nothing here that should be pulling this much energy from the battery. My only theories are that either Miyoo's firmware for the chipset is wildly out of date or borked in some way, the display could be a power hog, maybe, or there's some sort of service or a daemon making the CPU run at max frequency at all times. I looked at my profiler and the clock speeds were the same nearly during idle and high performance tasks. So I'm leaning more towards firmware because the Miyoo A30 had trash battery life too when it shouldn't have. but that still doesn't explain how no one on the development team caught this. This is not a minor bug, but a huge issue. You can see the Miyoo losing battery life on idle in real time. Remember, the unit has a 3000 mAh battery at 3.7 volts. If you take 3 watts away on average, that's at best 3.7 hours of battery life. But remember, that's when idling, not when playing a game. During a heavy game session like Sonic Adventure 2, you can see the hardware becoming pegged. GPU usage here has increased, and so has the load, yet the CPU frequency has not changed much. All 4 cores still reading that max clock speed. This isn't a static value either, because some cores will drop frequency to allow the faster ones to chug along. This indicates to me that there's some sort of CPU governing behavior that mandates maxed out clocks at all times. And why that's not a dynamic behavior, I have no idea. The chipset is not suicidal. Rockchip doesn't give their stamp of approval on running the 3566 above 1.8 GHz. But here Miyoo is doing it like it's nobody's business. And you may think that this is something new for them, but no, it's not. Miyoo is no stranger to these clock speed shenanigans, because their A30 also pushed its clock speeds past stock configurations. The All-Winner A33 was a chip that had a stock clock of 1.2 GHz, but on the A30, you could bump that up to 1.3 for better performance. I think that's what's happening here, minus the user choice. No, I'm pretty positive of that actually. The clock speed just never changes otherwise. I've tried unsuccessfully to change the clock speed from within the settings menu. Sometimes I can get it to go to like 1800 MHz or the lowest at 1460 something I believe. But it's not consistent and it doesn't stay like that before being blasted back up to 1.9 GHz. I get it, higher end emulation is pretty frequency sensitive. But you know what else is sensitive because of frequency? That's right, heat. This device can get surprisingly toasty, and I honestly can't tell you why just from outside testing alone. The hottest spots I can feel are of course the battery, but more surprisingly, the very bottom of the display. That area right above the charging and HDMI out ports. It's so random too because during most sessions, you can't feel it. But then one session will come along and now your hands have a personal heater. So let's take the Flip apart and see what we can find. Maybe there's some sort of clue in the design or board that lets us know what the hardware team was thinking. Okay, so this is going to be a pretty quick section. To open up the Miyoo, it only takes 4 Phillips head screws. Once that's open, you're faced with the board itself. And then from there, it only takes another 4 board level screws to unclip the board and free it from its plastic housing. So there's not too much in the way of obstacles, no plastic clips, nothing stupid like that. So the hardware team gets my commendations in that regard. And looking at the microscopic view of the board itself, you can see, of course, the main SoC, which is the Rockchip RK3566. You also have your SEC248 RAM package, which is 1 GB of LPDDR4. Very nice. And you can also see how intricate the traces themselves are, connecting the SoC to the RAM package. All in all, this is a very solid design. There's nothing really to complain about here. It's very well optimized, and like I said earlier, I had a feeling that this would be a quite space efficient design. So up in this corner, you'll see the Rockchip RK817-5 chip, which is basically a power management IC. It has a few main functions, which are power regulation, battery management, and it can also control the real-time clock. Under power regulation, what it basically does is provides multiple power rails for the SoC and your other components, so like the CPU, the GPU, and the RAM. It can also handle step-down or step-out converters to efficiently manage power distribution, which is very good. Love to see this chip here. For in-depth battery management, it also monitors battery voltage, the current, and its temperature. And then this chip also supports charging protocols and protections, so stuff like over voltage, over current, and over temperature. Now this chip also can function as a real-time clock, and we do have a real-time clock app in the Miyoo Flip utility tray, but unfortunately I don't think it's working correctly. So this chip is supposed to provide a low power clock function for maintaining time even when the system is powered off. This chip can also drive sleep and wake functionality, as well as timestamp tracking, which my script personally uses.
Unfortunately, on the Miyoo, if you power the device off, the real-time clock stops working and you have to reset the time, which has been really annoying for me as I've been turning this device on and off. The last few weeks I've been testing it. So hopefully that's something that I can get rectified in firmware, because this chip should be able to act as that RTC. But other than that, the board is designed very well. You can actually see here I'm doing a side-by-side with the Miyoo A30 board on the left and this new Miyoo Flip board on the right. I mean, they've tightened up their spacing, their traces are more defined, the capacitors looked better organized, there's added functionality and new chips on the board. It's a very solid design. I really can't complain hardware and engineering wise on this board. Though, again, it's not bulletproof. So if a lot of the experiences that we're having come down to software, I know for a fact there's got to be something wrong with the display itself. That display has to be, where they cut corners, because I don't see any corners being cut here on the actual board itself. So I'm going to flash over to that scene and we'll actually go over the display and see if we can identify anything on it. And I'm sorry to disappoint you guys, but I was not able to find anything about this display. The only thing I could identify was the Realtek RTL8733BU chip, which is supposed to be a Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 5.2 chip. Other than that, got nothing for you guys. I looked everywhere, tried to scour so many different data sheets for this display. None of its identifying codes came up. The only thing I think is that this could be the same display that's used in the RG355XX or whatever. So that's it. There's honestly not too many 3.5-inch 640 by 480 panels around that are LCD. So that's my best guess. But I'm really sorry about that, because I have a feeling that if we could find out more about this display and dive deeper into its characteristics, we'd come to realize that it's kind of not a good fit for this console. Myself, I've experienced that when my handheld gets hot, the fringes of the display get, really warm itself, and they start exhibiting this LCD panel glow. It's not a good look. And I'm hoping that if there is a hardware revision, I'm not counting on it, but if they do one, the display is the first thing they swap out. Just try to find a better quality one. But that's it for this assembly. Pretty quick. We pretty much found out everything we need to know, and we need to put a bounty out on this display. That's the main thing. So I'll send you back over to the conclusion section. Thank you.
How did it come to this, guys? A company that designs very attractive looking hardware, but completely bungles its actual launch and execution. Well, part of the issue, I'll say, is us as a consumer. Our willingness to accept and excuse less just because we like the way a device looks, or because of the promise of the community fixing it later. It's a bad idea to buy a product you know will be subpar, all in hopes that the Spruce OS or other custom firmware devs will fix things. It's not their job to bring the device into a usable state because Miyoo failed to. It's not their job to make sure the CPU governs its clock speeds correctly. And it's certainly not their job to tune emulators and make sure the basic functionality of the device is in working order. My ROMs should work, and the systems Miyoo advertises and installs should have good performance. Don't give me 2 sticks, N64 and Dreamcast emulators, then deliver awfully configured out-of-the-box performance. If the device can't handle the system, don't advertise it. Let the community install and figure it out in that case. If we can't get it, at least it can be said we went out as mavericks to get it working ourselves. Not that you shipped a poor user experience and left it to the community to carry the cross. We as consumers have to get more discerning with the products and companies we support in this niche. Remember, my friends, there are no kings, only kingdoms. Do not put companies on so much of a pedestal that you'll throw away your discerning attitudes for the promise of flashy and cute trinkets. This device launched on AliExpress for $80 US, or at least pre-sale was, and it sold out almost instantly. That has already financially incentivized Miyoo to repeat whatever they did with this device next time. We cannot let them get away with this. $80 for a device with these sorts of problems. That's not good, everyone. Don't tell me Spruce OS will fix this, or Arc OS, Miyoo OS, or whatever custom firmware ends up getting supported. I know they will, but it's not their job. The Spruce team did not sell me the Flip. It was Miyoo, and they need to fix their device, and hopefully fix it without a hardware revision. Give us a new OS image, firmware updates, whatever may have you, but a new hardware revision so close after launch would be a slap in the face for everyone who waited so long and supported this device day one. I mean, if you want to get hyperbolic about it, we could potentially have a mini Raptor-like situation on our hands here. Miyoo's juicing these chips, and who knows what the long-term effects can be. Though, whatever they are, you can count on me to be right there to give you the proper right rundown. So should you buy this device? Yeah, that's a good one. No, you should not. Wait for a steep sale or for another custom firmware team to tackle this. But at the very least, let's wait for what Miyoo does. If they don't acknowledge the issues, at the very least, well then we have our answer on how they feel about long-term support. And if they're moving towards a community fixes as long-term support, well then we need to ask for better compensation in the form of cheaper launch day devices. I think that's fair, right? You ship the broken product, we fix it up, and well, everyone benefits. In fact, Miyoo, you can just outsource the stock OS development to other teams. Pay them to do it. Establish that community connection. I would pay more for a fully featured Retrohandheld device, to have that awesome marriage of great hardware with slick and intuitive software. That is a pairing made in heaven. And we never seem to get it often. But I know, wishful thinking on my part. Well, at any rate, I'll be sure to keep my eye on the Flip and any updates in the pipeline for its stock configuration, just as you should keep your eye on my channel and what I've got next. I'm working on a super special video right now. I've got something good cooking up from CES to show you all, so hopefully that'll be ready in a bit. I'm really excited about that. I just can't wait. But that's for later. So until then, this is a Silicon Fox saying ciao.